Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Escaping the Brave New World. My name is David Gosselin, and I'm here with our new guest, Dr. Quan Le, who is a psychiatrist, Confucian scholar, and most importantly, lover of wisdom. Welcome, Quan.
Thanks, Dave.
Welcome back, everybody. So we're continuing on our journey of a rectification of terms, which is something we started last week, where our episode was called Apollonians, Prometheans, Dionysians, and Epicureans. And we sort of went through a psychological profile of what each of these types of personalities are in order to, in a sense, get a better sense for ourselves of where we fall in the many categories that define, human nature today, which has become increasingly what is human nature, right? There's so many ways to approach that, which I think comes down to a question of epistemology, right? There's so many different theories. And while from day to day, this is what we were talking about last time with Adam Sedia, which is that from day to day, these kind of seemingly abstract philosophical questions, especially in times of peace and relative comfort, they seem very remote. But the idea is that when you actually zoom out and you get a macro picture of what society over the ages looks like, the rise and falls of civilizations, you see that the image of man, the dominant idea of what human nature is, has a direct bearing on how that civilization unfolds and behaves and its ultimate fate. So it's no small question. And today our episode is called Exiting the Cave: Timocrats, Democrats, Oligarchs, and Tyranny. So these are the categories that we're going to look at, which come from Plato's Republic, which despite all the, there's all layer and layer of commentary, age after age, year after year, scholar after scholar. And a lot of it tends to obscure the essential truths that Plato was getting at, I think. And I think today, if we look at the United States and Western civilization, if you look at Plato's categories, he quite succinctly predicts the kind of decline and degeneration that occurs when we lose sight of certain higher ideas and a vision of what true human nature is, right? And what real human beings should be striving for, which is namely goodness, truth, and beauty. So I guess our show is what happens when we don't pursue that, and how do we get out of that? How do we get out of these binds and find some higher ground to transcend it all? And yeah, I think that we can just start the conversation there.
Sure.
So yeah, I would just read one quote by Confucius and then allow you, maybe Quan, to just describe what these basic categories are. You have your own hexagram, right, where you kind of define the categories. So you can kind of just go through how you view each category. And ultimately, I think as people are listening, they should ask themselves, where do they fall in these categories? So Confucius, in his rectification of names, says a superior man, in regard to what he does not know, shows a cautious reserve. If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, proprieties and music do not flourish. When proprieties and music do not flourish, punishments will not be properly awarded. When punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move hand or foot. Therefore, a superior man considers it necessary that the names he uses may be spoken appropriately, and also that what he speaks may be carried out appropriately. What the superior man requires is just that in his words, there may be nothing incorrect. I see this as, you can't solve a problem if you can't put a name on it. So today, Western civilization is in a deep crisis, and I think it warrants this deeper philosophical journey, which, whether in the case of Confucius or Plato, both of them emerged in a time of great crisis, right? Plato with the 30 tyrants, Confucius with the warring states period. So philosophy was a very practical question. It was actually the most vital question if we were actually going to figure out how did we get here and where do we go? What do you think, Juan?
Well, I think that the quote you chose is absolutely awesome because it's a kind of epistemological summary, or to be precise, it's a kind of practical political repercussions of bad or false epistemology, okay? Because he was speaking of behavior, right? He was speaking of language, of the right words, of the impact on social affairs, of the impact on the success of the affairs, and with the impact on the absence of success about music and Li, which is ceremony, but it's much more than ceremony, meaning much more the right behavior and the right attitude in society in accord with the eternal laws, or with natural laws, if you prefer. Mm-hmm. So I would say that, that I have the maybe a certain proclivity to make rapprochement between Greek philosophy and Chinese philosophies. So I would say that it's a kind of a very small nutshell of what Plato himself wrote in the Republic, okay? Because maybe for our public, I would like to take 2 minutes to talk about the hexagram with its lower trigram and its upper trigram, making the rapprochement with the Plato categories or Plato lexicon, if you prefer. I think that everyone saw the famous 6 lines from the famous I Ching, and everyone probably remember that you have 6 lines, one after the others, broken lines or plain lines, right? I'm not here tonight to talk about divination. I'm here tonight to talk about philosophy and political philosophy and epistemology. So the lines are number 1, 2, 3 for the first 3 lines from bottom up. And that's the first trigram. The second trigram is number 4, 5, 6, right? And the first trigram, or the lower trigram, is called the animal kingdom. For Plato, the animal kingdom is called doxa, or opinion, okay? And for Plato, for Confucius, the upper trigram is the divine kingdom, and for Plato, it's episteme, for science, or right knowledge, or simply knowledge. We understand that when we say knowledge without precision, it means right knowledge. So that's why we are speaking of epistemology, right? Because the upper trigram of the divine kingdom is precisely that kingdom of right knowledge. And epistemology is the discipline, the science, or simply the journey of the soul from the animal kingdom to the divine kingdom. Let's start with, sorry, keep on.
No, go on.
Okay, so let's start with Confucius, because Confucius is easier to remember, okay, because he simply used symbolic ages, okay, for the 6 lines. First, for the animal kingdom or lower trigram, the first line is the symbolic age of 15. The second line is the symbolic age of 30. And the third, the symbolic age of 40. For the upper trigram, you have the symbolic age of 50, 60, and 70. And for each of those lines correspond a level of understanding of reality, okay, of inner reality and of outer reality. And Plato would use exactly the same journey, if you want. And that's why I call Plato and Confucius the two spiritual brothers living at the two ends of the Wern Island. Okay, for the maniacs of geopolitics like me, the expression Wern Island is not a strange one. Okay, because the Wern Island is precisely that tricontinental mass formed by Africa, Europe, and Asia. And of course, Plato living in Greece is at the western end of the Wern Island, and Confucius in China at the eastern end of the Wern Island. Mm-hmm. And coming back to Plato, for what Confucius called the lower trigram and Plato the doxa kingdom, a kingdom of opinions, he would place three kinds of man corresponding to three kinds of understanding and three kinds of behavior. General behavior and political behavior, of course, because we all understand that political behavior is a subset of general behavior, of course. And we can even ask the question, can we escape politics as a human? I don't think so, because I think that when two humans are together, two humans beings are together, you have a relation, okay? And when you have a relation with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 3 billion, you have politics.
Yeah.
Necessarily. Okay. So
Plato said in his Republic, there are as many kinds of states as there are kinds of men, right? That the different kinds of states are derived from the different kinds of characters of men, which seems
exactly.
So there are different characters, and there's always going to be a mixing, right? There's never a pure abstraction of just one, but they're there. They're these particular kinds of identities, and based on that identity, there's a whole panoply of different kinds of behaviors, ideas, and things that they'll do. And having a profile of this is very useful if we're actually going to get somewhere and navigate it.
Yes, absolutely. I even use a very grandiose expression for the hexagram or the doxa episteme couple, if I may say so. I call it a psychocosmogram, okay? A psychocosmogram, because we are dealing with psychological realities, but those psychological realities will have an impact on this political, social, and universal realities, okay? Because as you said, in a city, you have all kinds of people with all kinds of epistemological development, of course.
Yeah.
But as in an army, the officers have the responsibility to give leadership, okay? And one of the, I would say maybe the main responsibility of the leadership team is to inspire respect and confidence. Because if you don't inspire respect and confidence, you will not be able to influence the people in the animal kingdom, okay? Because let's not forget that in the natural laws recognize that there is a natural hierarchy, okay? And you know that I often argue by etymology. Hierarchy comes from two Greek words, hieros and arche, meaning the command or the power of the sacred. And that sacred is precisely that natural laws. It means that in nature, and humans beings are part of nature, but we have the capacity to go to the outmost development of that nature, meaning the divine kingdom. And we have the responsibility precisely to uplift everyone to the divine kingdom as much as possible, because ultimately the most powerful human organization is a republic composed of mostly gentlemen, okay? We can fantasize that there could be a society only formed by true theocratic man and aristocratic man and philosophical man. That would be the city of God on earth, if I may borrows in Augustine expression.
Right.
Okay, and precisely, I will do stuff in the reverse. Instead of going by starting at the animal kingdom, I will start with the divine kingdom, or episteme for Plato. Okay, knowledge. 3, 4, 5, not 3, 4, 5, but 4, 5, 6. Sorry. At the lowest level of the divine kingdom, we have the timocratic man. Okay, it's not a usual word, so I wouldn't spell it. Timocratic, timocratic. And timocratic comes from timos. Timos means reward. Okay, but it's not physical reward, it's psychological reward. Because a timocratic man is motivated by honor and by justice. Okay, so that kind of man or women. Okay, so we understand that when I say man, it includes women. And for those people who will be in the woke culture, saying man doesn't exclude the women, because the word for man in Latin is vir. Okay, so when I say man, it's mankind. Okay, so I am speaking of men and women. So the timocratic man then is the man that will act because he wants to establish justice and honor. That's the first level of the divine kingdom. And beauty is a fancy name for justice. Okay, because in the dimension of beauty, of course, you have physical beauty, you have beauty of music, you have beauty of the movement of the planets and so on. But justice is also in the domain of beauty. Okay, I think in English you can say that too, but in French, I know that in French we can say un beau geste, for example. Okay, a beautiful gesture. A beautiful gesture means a right gesture, a right attitude, a right decision, a right movement, etc. Okay, so when it's right, it's beautiful. So justice is in the domain of beauty. So the first level of the divine kingdom is precisely beauty or justice. After that, you have the aristocratic man, and aristos means the best in Greek, of course. And the best is characterized by love, okay, by agape. And that is a very special kind of love that is pervasive, all encompassing. Okay, it's not only it's will include the usual romantic love, but it's first and foremost a love for understanding of reality. Okay, inner reality, outer reality, my reality, the reality of the other human beings that I interact with, etc. Mm-hmm. So that agape will push us to a special kind of mental attitude called dialektikon by Plato, or agape by the Christians, okay? Meaning a playful exploration, okay? The Greek terminology will put more emphasis on the intellectual dimension. The Christian word for that, agape, will put more emphasis on the care the other. Okay, but you know perfectly well that you cannot care, you cannot take care of someone in a good manner if you don't understand that person or if you don't love that person. Okay, so there's no contradiction. Those words which seems not to be on the same domain are on the same domain,
right?
And you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts. Finish your yeah, no, but it's fine. Go with all the categories. Philosophy.
So,
right?
Okay, so those those aristocratic men are nourished and nurtured by that agape, by that dialektikon, and because of it, those people have a proclivity to favor or to be motivated by creativity, by inventivity, by discovery. Okay, so the Plato would call the timocratic man the fierce class, meaning the man who will protect the city. The obvious example is the military, of course, but you don't have to be necessarily in the military being a democratic man. Okay, you can offer the protective function in many roles inside the city.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a doctor, for example, you can have a protective role, okay, even if you're not a military man, okay. But if you are a doctor that would invent cures, invent treatments, okay, you would be an aristocratic man in your function of a doctor. So you can have the same social role, but functioning at different level of epistemological development.
Mm-hmm.
And after the aristocratic man, of course, you have the philosophical man. And what is the philosophical man? Well, the philosophical man is the level of truth. Okay, so we said that the democratic man is at the level of beauty of justice. The aristocratic man is at the level of goodness, which is another name for agape. And the philosophical man is at the level of truth. So he's motivated by creating precisely the democratic man and the aristocratic man. Okay, it would be the first of the kind of man present in the divine kingdom or in the city of God, if you want.
Give us some names of some what you would consider, who you would consider philosophical men, philosophical kings.
Ah, well, why not Plato and Confucius?
Perfect. Good. I have a thought, but I wanted to let you finish your thought.
Okay, maybe I will take 2 minutes to finish with the lower trigram or
right
the animal kingdom. So lines 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely.
So the animal kingdom is the kingdom with a lower knowledge or no knowledge, since Plato called it doxa, opinion. Okay, right. So the first level, which is the lowest level, is called the democratic man. Okay, so nothing against democracy, okay, as understood by us now in 2022, right? Because demos at the time of Plato means the people, but for those who know a little bit of ancient Greek, demos is not really the people, it's rather the mob, okay? If not the rabble. So demos, so the democratic man is the man motivated by hedonism, so sensual pleasure, but without constraint, without self-discipline or self-mastery. He would be motivated by tribal affinities. And he would be motivated by lex talionis. Okay, lex talionis is eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Okay, so by revenge, if you want. And his epistemological level is quite low because his understanding is through senses perceptions. Okay, he's not capable or very weak in abstract thinking, in generalization, in playful exploration, in discovery, in creativity, everything that would characterize the aristocratic man.
Right, so reality is very much derived from their own personal experience and feelings about that experience. You know, they've
exactly
had experience and they felt good about a certain thing, so they're going to assume that because there was a certain positive affectation associated with these images, those are good. And the things where they had negative affectation, well, those are bad. And that's pretty much what their system is based on, right?
Exactly. And when I said tribal affinities, it's not only the tribe in the sense of a small nation, okay? It's also people that would think like them. They would not be capable to have a healthy debate with someone not sharing their opinions, okay? And a tribal in that intellectual sense too, okay? It's not only tribal in the sense of a small nation. And that is the first level of epistemological development. And the second level would be the plutocratic man. The plutocratic man is a little bit more advanced in terms of understanding of reality compared with the democratic man, but he's motivated by wealth power, and profit. Okay, so he would be capable to smile to his enemy. He would be capable to be hypocritical if he's talking to someone he doesn't agree with. He is capable to smile and to say that that he will listen to his arguments and so on. But inside his mind and his heart, he's not really open to understand the other. He's only interested to find a way to take advantage of the other. Okay, since he's motivated by profits, power, and wealth. The democratic man would admire the plutocratic man, okay, because he feels that the plutocratic man is a little bit more advanced than him. He's capable of tricks and of a certain self-mastery that would be admired rightly by the democratic man, since the plutocratic man is truly a little bit more advanced, epistemologically speaking, than the democratic man. And the last or the most advanced, epistemologically speaking, man of the animal kingdom is called the fake democratic man, okay? Because on the outside, he would have all the outside characteristic of a democratic man. If you are not wise enough, bright enough to see that he's fake, you might think that he's a true democratic man, meaning a man upholding justice and honor. I think that I don't need to...
Virtue signaling today sounds like the typification of that, right? They sort of feign goodness, truth, and beauty, and they shame those who don't, quote unquote, meet the perceived, status of these things. And you see this in religion, you see this in politics, right? They'll always carry this bearing of virtue and goodness, but they're really driven by their self-interest and their tribal affinity at the end of the day. But they'll always frame those things as, a question of truth and goodness and virtue.
Absolutely. I would say that
they're dangerous. There's a lot of them too. They're very dangerous.
Well, they are the thinkers of the animal kingdom. Okay, let's not forget that. Okay, so they are the advisor to the plutocrats.
Right.
So those, well, I'm sorry to say that. I hope I won't bring problems to you, Dave. But when I'm thinking of a fake democratic man, I cannot resist to think to Henry Kissinger, for example, or to Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Right.
Okay. For me, they are the perfect personification of the fake democratic man. Because let's be frank, they might seem very impressive for most people.
Right. And I mean, that's the problem, right? Like in a sense, they're imitators, which is, again, Plato in I'm quite sure it's the 10th book, right? He uses examples of the poets and artists, and he provokes everybody by saying, should we allow these people into our republic? But he really, I think much of the republic is really based on, at the end of the day, are we able to make a distinction between what's actually goodness, truth, and beauty, and what are just imitations, right? Mimesis of these things. And those people who are the best at imitating these things, and in a sense, there's a lot of psychological reasons perhaps why they'd want to do that. Sure, self-interest, ultimately, but they also haven't done the work, right, of actually working on a real epistemological journey, a journey of the soul, of unearthing or wrestling with the deeper paradoxes and questions regarding, the nature of what universe are we in? What is the nature of the universe we're in, and what's our relationship with that? They don't really care about that, right? They care about their self-interest and advancement in what they see as a game. And the better ones are the ones who are best at imitating the upper trigram, right? Imitating the sort of values of the divine kingdom, or framing things as values of the divine kingdom, but they're really just animals that are more clever than the rest of the tribe. And for that reason, they're very dangerous. And it seems like, yeah, because they can be fooled. They're dangerous also because they can fool people. And so Plato really emphasized how, do we actually, the whole republic, right? There's a series of thought experiments, right? He has dialogues with different people, and he says, well, let's imagine this situation, or let's imagine that, and this is what you think. So what would you do in this situation? And that's his way of sort of testing the axioms of the people and sort of pushing them into different boundary conditions where you see what they're really made of, right? Especially, if they're in a position of power, that's where you're going to see how their thinking actually pans out in the real world, because now they're in a position where they can sort of enforce and exert their will on others. So it's no small matter, for everybody who is fooled by these people and doesn't have the epistemological development to recognize the imitations, because they themselves have not, right, gone through the process. And I mean, this is the eternal struggle, n'est-ce pas?
Absolutely. And I would like to bring in a clinical observation. The psychopath are known in clinical medicine as people not having the same wiring, the same connection in their brain than what is called a normal person, right? Mm-hmm. And the true psychopath, which is born. Okay, first I would like to make the distinction between the psychopath and the sociopath. The psychopath is born and the sociopath is made. Okay, the sociopath would be the person that had a very difficult childhood, or has been victim of violence, psychological violence, or sexual violence, or physical violence when very young. And the psychopath is born like that. And because he's born like that, it's very difficult for him to have natural emotional reaction, and he would be in a turmoil, in deep difficulty to identify what is living as emotions, or emotions expressed by others. Mm-hmm. And we were speaking of imitation. The bright psychopath, if I may say so, will learn to imitate the emotional expressions of the other people as the sociopath, but maybe the sociopath has less problems because he was not born like that, but he was made. So he has a certain connection to natural emotions.
Right.
Why do I bring that medical clinical considerations? It's because it's linked to the idea of imitation. Okay, the natural democratic man, plutocratic man, and fake democratic man would imitate because they are not epistemologically developed enough. But the psychopath and the sociopath would imitate because they don't even have the animal machinery to act like normal human beings.
I mean, the first question, I mean, that comes to mind. So do you think that's really do you think that's the main problem when we're talking about statecraft, right? Like Plato talks about how there's also a degeneration that occurs, and he talks about even the transition, right? How does the timocratic man become a democratic man or an oligarchical man, right? And the different, like, there is some moving of between the ranks and whatnot. So it's not like purely, it's not predetermined, but there are these basic psychological profiles that people will sort of assume.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you, Dave, because I want to stress that you said something very important when speaking of Plato, okay? because you know that nowadays the plutocrats precisely are very eager to make Plato appear as a fascist.
Yeah.
And what you said is major, okay? For Plato, there's an open invitation for everyone to upgrade their epistemological level, okay? So it's not something that you are condemned to, okay? You can work on yourself and you can upgrade your understanding of reality, okay? Contrary to Aristotle, who was the true fascist and who thought that some are born to be master and others are born to be slaves.
Yeah, and I mean the perfect example is because I was just listening all the time and I was listening to a podcast recently, and of course, I mean this guy is like has an Orthodox Christian sort of background, and I mean he's describing the most absurd fascist, his own imagining of Plato as this insane tyrant who wants to, make everything conform to geometrical ratios, and so he's a psychopath. But there, Plato in his Meno dialogue, I mean, if he believed that, why would he use the example of a slave boy to demonstrate that this slave boy actually has the ability to discover the solution to a problem that, his master is just kind of looking on and doesn't really understand, right? He's the oligarch, Meno, and the slave boy is the one actually doubling the square. And Plato, this is a very famous passage where Plato prompts the boy by asking him a series of questions, which allows the light to turn on, right? Which is really the idea, is the basis of the Platonic approach. And I'd say the basis of a classical education, and I mean the basis of human nature, right? In recognizing that we're not conditioning dogs. It's not reward and punishment. It's not Aristotelian logic, which is all Aristotelian logic is, right? Dog goes place A, gets rewarded. Dog goes place A, gets punished. Dog knows that place A is good, place A is bad, place B is bad. Logic is just, a binary system, however, a supercomputer it is. It's just still a series of, ones and zeros, or, reward and punishment. And a society that just trains its people based on this, you could say, maybe I'll say something controversial, but like I'd say that's the legalist outlook when compared to the Confucian, right, which assumes that man is inherently good, whereas the subtle difference is the legalist, which ostensibly the same goal, but assumes that man is inherently bad. And so how do you train somebody? What's the best that if human nature is inherently bad, what's the best that you can go for? Well, I mean, you can negate the bad so that people follow the rules. And if they don't follow the rules, you punish them. And if they follow the rules, they're rewarded. Again, you're just training dogs at this point. But I'd say the Confucian idea, which you see expressed, I mean, if we switch the frame, which I think is fun, right? So Western version of that, Plato prompting the young slave boy, asks him a series of questions where the paradox becomes clear, and the boy is able to generate the solution. The light turns on, and that's humanity, right? The evolution of humanity is a series of lights turning on, right? And you could say that evil is really the attempt to sort of dim that light at every point, right? So that they can sort of carry out their own self-interest, which doesn't, can't actually be dignified in the light of reason. And so they have to create all these complex sophistries and things to justify that, hence the imitation, hence the psychopaths and sociopaths that are drawn to that. And, all the more, where are the philosopher kings? Where are the aristocratic men that are able to intervene on that? Which is really, I guess, the question for, at least in the West, right, the civilizational crisis that we have. We can go on and on about what's right and what's good, but finally, where are the people that are supposed to be intervening on the evil that's being committed, not only in the West, but that has, by a small profiles, oligarchy, democracy sort of imposing its will and trying to pervert everything to sort of advance its interests. Where are the truth tellers, right?
I would say, where are the educators? Okay, because once again, etymology, educare, to bring forth what is within, and what is within is precisely truth, goodness, and beauty, instead of imposing a dog training precisely. You know that we can, Aristotle, maybe I'm a bit caricatural here and I'm not fair to him, but Aristotle is truly the dog training, and Plato is the education, okay, educare, to bring forth what is within, or as in the Meno, Socrates in the Meno was capable to bring forth what was within the boy slaves, truth, goodness, and beauty, asking him the right question so he can solve the geometrical problem.
Right. And I mean, I guess today there's a lot of this kind of determinism, right? Where this is popular. I mean, it's becoming very eugenics, whether it's on the left side or genomics and behavioral genetics and all that. There's really an attempt to sort of suggest that, intelligent, different people are just naturally sort of, have this innate talent, and everybody has their talents, right? But the question that I have, because we're talking about the lights turning on, what prevents the light from turning on, right? Is it just that it's not there, that it can't be turned on, that the person's just a dullard, which is what some of the John Rawlings Rees, I've been doing a lot of work on this, one of the founders of modern psychiatry, in British psychiatry, of course, Tavistock Institute. His basic psychiatric assumptions and goal was selection. How do you identify the neurotics from the non-neurotics, from the higher performers, so that we can get like the right people in the right position and find a place for the dullards, which he thinks are like about 10% of the population. But they don't really have, it's very Aristotelian. They don't have an idea of educare, of unfolding something. They have an idea of picking racehorses, and you're pretty much, the most you can aspire to is to, pick the right horses, but it's ultimately sort of predetermined, which today is being very much, it's popular in pop culture and sci-fi. I mean, if we watch Netflix or Amazon Prime, I lost count of the number of series where it's a character or people that have been genetically modified or chemically, enhanced, that are superior to the non-enhanced, non-genetically modified, organic, natural humans, which they're weaker, they're less smart. So we very much have this, and that's the question: how do we change the state, right? The character, the psychology of people. Is that something that can be changed? Because we started with the idea that, and I guess I'll just add, we started with the idea of the image of man, right? That the image that people have of themselves will ultimately determine the boundaries of, what they're capable of, what they believe, what they're willing or ready to do. And in one of these studies called The Changing Images of Man by a Tavistock-related Stanford Research Institute, it's a famous paper, The Changing Images of Man. They make the point, because they're looking to shift Western civilization away from a Judeo-Christian industrial civilization towards a post-industrial, kind of more pagan, feeling-based society. And they're saying that the biggest resistance to the change in where we encounter the greatest resistance in people, especially in therapeutic settings, are a change of identity. That's where people are most likely to sort of push back when it comes to a juncture where making the leap will require them to change their fundamental identity. And so the reason it's called The Changing Images of Man is they're looking at, how do you subtly alter what already is and to create what's more, adaptive for their purposes of imposing basically a Malthusian, circular economy, which is what we're talking about. This is what the World Economic Forum is. This is what the Green New Deal and, all the green financial reforms are about. They want to change the image of man. So that seems to be the great challenge. If the light isn't turning on for certain people, is it just because they're dullards? Or, what's the story?
No, I think that there is no one who is a dullard. I would say that some person has more talent for languages or for images or for sounds, okay? That those kind of things I can believe. But no, yeah, exactly. But no one is a complete idiot, okay? It doesn't exist. And I would say I would like to maybe to answer your question by using another way to introduce the hexagram or the 6 lines, okay? There is a concept or 3 words called personality, individuality, and universal self. And when the Tavistock-inspired psychiatry try to change people, they change it at the level of personality. Okay, as you know, a personality comes from persona, and persona is the Latin name for the mask that the actors, the Greek actors and the Roman actors were wearing in the past to amplify their voices. Okay, when they are actors in the play. So that personality, from a psychological standpoint, are the voices of the people having influenced us, okay? The authority figure, our parents, our teachers, our friends that were important for us, and so on. So the Tavistock psychology tried to change the personality, the mask, the voices that influences a certain person, but they don't go to the second stage, which is called individuality. Okay, so we said that the hexagram has 6 lines, so the personality would correspond to line 1 and 2. The individuality would correspond to line 3 and 4. And when you have a true individuality, you are a true democratic man. Okay, because often individuality is granted to you when you do your things. Okay, when you are capable to say no to a voice inside you who have been given to you by an authority figure, when you are advancing in your psychological life, right? So the Tavistock psychology is a very primitive one, since it's a psychology that doesn't allow people to keep on the journey of the soul or to keep on the epistemological development. And the third stage, which is the universal self, of course, are the last 2 lines, 5 and 6, which is creativity and the ultimate desire to create more democratic and aristocratic man in order to create the city of God on earth. So Tavistock psychology definitely has been created by people not interested by the city of God on earth.
Right. I mean, that was beautiful. I mean, there's a lot that could be said on that. In terms of I guess now we're really getting into the thick of things in terms of how our modern society is engineered, right? I think now we're actually getting to the problem, which is that, especially in modern times, I mean, I've written on this in recent research papers and stuff, like it's all applied behavioral science, social psychology. Kurt Lewin developed field theory and I forget what something topology, but it's all about the environment, right? And it's all about, but it's about the whole and looking at the interaction of all the parts, starting from the top and seeing how you can calibrate and adjust things in order to change the dynamic among all the parts. But like if you look at all these Tavistock people, so Kurt Lewin, two of the first of their journal, Human Relations, featured Lewin's work on group dynamics, group field theory, and all that. And then you have Sargent, right? Dr. William Sargent, who worked at Maudsley, the British military psychiatrist and then later civilian psychiatric hospital. And he went around profiling all the tribes, right? All primitive tribes across the world, Zaire, Haiti, Voodoo tribes, Christian fundamentalist preachers. And his whole idea was the physiology of conversion, how faith healers, shamans, and preachers can change your behavior and beliefs. So his whole idea was looking at the physiological aspect of all these people that claim to experience mystical experiences, right? So you have like the voodoo and the tribal, that I'm really bad at the rhythm, but you know, that was bad. And so getting the heart rate, right, to go up and creating the heightened emotional conditions in which the power of the imagery and the narratives associated that with that imagery there could be a cathexis, right? They could cathexis, they could associate a certain new state of affectation with that image, right? So they have this ecstasy and whatnot, and the images that they have, whether in their minds, people dancing or whatnot, are associated with that idea. And so it's all, I mean, at that level, I think potentially it's even lower than persona, right? Personality. It's like pure physiological. It's, you know, a classier version of whipping dogs. You know, you get them to dance around and play, you know, bongos or whatever, and you give them a story to go with it, and
exactly
that you can socially engineer all of society if you just encourage certain kinds of ritual beliefs and enforce certain images that people will have a specific affectation towards. And it's so brute force, right? So, but the question is, if people aren't to be conditioned by that, they need a deeper epistemological journey, a discovery of the self. And I mean, first philosopher, Thales, know thyself. I mean, he was one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece.
Yeah.
And it's technically, it's a very profound idea that even before you know yourself or whatnot, you have a self. You have a sovereign identity. You have a soul. And it is your duty and life's journey to discover who and what that is, who you are. And I'll just say, on a funnier note, I like the comedian Tim Dillon. He does a fun podcast. And he said, you can always see when you look at people and you can tell that they don't know who they are. They have no fucking idea who they are. And there's way too much of that. So of course, people who are not allowed to reach some sort of deeper epistemological level, of course they don't know who they are. Of course it's easy to change their persona, which they think is just normal, to sort of wear this mask or wear that mask. And
absolutely, and they don't have the other 2 deeper layers.
Yeah.
And when you don't have the 2 other deeper layers, new masks can be enforced upon you, and you don't have that sovereignty precisely given by the individuality layer and the universal self layer that would make you capable to exit the cave, since our subject is that exiting the cave, right?
Amen. Yeah.
So exiting the cave, there's no absolute answer, okay? But one possible answer to that question or to that quest is that you have to go deeper in yourself. And I use the concept of individuality and universal self as the 2 deeper layers of yourself, because your personality is part of self, but it's only the most superficial layer on which outside people can manipulate you, but they won't be capable to do so if you have the second layers called individuality, and if you have the third one called universal self, It's absolutely impossible to manipulate you. The only thing that is someone wishing to harm you can do to you is to kill you, but he won't be capable to manipulate you.
Right. On the so the second one, I mean, the third one is probably it's a whole journey of itself, right? But
Yeah,
we'll at least thaw out the second one here, individuality. I feel like this is where the dialogos comes in, right? The dialectic. Dialogos, it's a dialogue, it's two voices. And I mean,
exactly.
there's an interesting researcher, psychologist, John Vervaeke, I believe. He's been on Jordan Peterson, but I mean, they're rediscovering, I mean, we know this, but it's great to see it being done in an academic formal setting, that the basis, the baseline for reason is dialogos. And it's not, and the baseline for education, it's not a treatise. It's not a teacher just talking at the students like they're writing on blank slates and telling them, this is category A, this is category B. Nobody learns like that. That's just brainwashing, that's conditioning. It's dialogos, where you have a counterpoint and there's a dialogue between the person, their inner voice, their individuality, their sovereign self, and the various stimulus or thoughts, right? We have a million thoughts. We know they're not all right. We all have crazy thoughts all the time. We're like, well, that's a crazy thought. Some people have more or less trouble distinguishing what are the good thoughts for the bad thoughts. XYZ reason. You're a doctor. I'm not. You probably have a better understanding than that than I do. But so the dialectic seems like the first path to discovering one's sovereign self is, I mean, they talk about, especially in a spiritual sense, listening to your inner voice and sort of what is your inner voice actually telling you? And can it teach you anything that you don't know, which is a paradox, right? Like, or you may be, or you're doing something that you know is wrong and you know it's wrong, you still do it. So there's two different drives there. And the inner voice is able to inform you that this is probably not a good idea. I mean, you know, the ego is like, shut up. But so what happens when people start to listen? I mean, this is my way of framing it, but listening to their inner voice, can it teach them things that does it know things that they don't, right? Is that not the dialectical process? Like, how do we make discoveries? It's still us. Nobody is, unless we believe in an elect, we believe in an Aristotelian priesthood, where divine mysteries are being imparted. You know, we join some Freemasonic cult or university, you know, frat house or whatever, and they incrementally sort of hand us down knowledge and mysteries. If it's not that, then it's going to have to come from this process from within. And is that not dialogos? Is that not the first approximation to exiting the cave?
Exactly. And I would say that it's the favorite tool of the fake democratic man, okay, to invent a sort of a fake hierarchy that would flatter your ego, and that would make you feel that you have been chosen to be part of that hierarchy, that fake hierarchy, and precisely to bring you further away from the true epistemological development or your true journey of the soul.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in modern I mean, we could go down a real rabbit hole with what we just said, right?
Oh,
you know,
you have meters and meters of books in libraries about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know it's a thing. I mean, whether it's the, you know, most extreme sort of satanic types, oligarchical structures as well, or, you know, the Church of Scientology, which I listened to, interesting one. But the Hubbard, he modeled his idea of the levels of secret knowledge that you ascend to based off of Crowley, right? Aleister Crowley and his lodges, right? His satanic lodges. of course named, the Agape Lodge and the This Lodge.
Of course, of course.
Of course.
I'm happy you mentioned Crowley because he's the absolute ancestors of all those, of all that madness in the West since the last century.
Yeah. So outside of that secret knowledge, I mean, I guess the reality is, or here's a way to look at it. In a sense, I was thinking evil is really at the end of it's skipping steps, in the sense that the whole thing about secret knowledge is, sure, I'll do this, I'll submit and follow this set of rules, and I'm going to be handed down these mysteries. Notice there's no inner work, right? There's no inner effort. There's no dialogos. It's really something that's being imparted to you by the gods, right? By
by an authority.
The Hermetic cults, right? Hermes was the imparter of divine wisdom. They love that stuff, right?
Yes. By an authority that would ask you something in return that might not be very clear at the beginning.
Right. And I mean, God, there's so many dimensions to that, whether, the confusion and the mystery is, even in modern behavioral science, I was watching a guy, Cialdini, I forget, it was David Cialdini, Michael Cialdini, and he they've done big, human behavior studies and about success in business. And one of the things that he said was very important to getting reciprocation from people was mystery. It was an element of like, there's this thing, and I'm going to tell you this, however, the clever you are, where you make it look like it's not obvious what you're doing, you just kind of provoke curiosity. People are more likely to break profile. They're more likely to take a chance because now they want to know. But also just authority, right? A lot of behavioral science, whether it's the in-group, out-group, it's the experts, right? The expert class, the peer-reviewed science, quote unquote, right? It's consensus. And I love how the articles these days, they always say, scientists say, or according to experts, or most recent research says, it's really just consensus and groupthink, which they're trying to frame as a scientific argument. But it has the same sort of mythology to it, right? That there's this expert class, you're the plebes, you don't know. And if you want to know, you just have to follow the rules and do what you're told. So there's never the prompting of that light turning on. It's always the external prodding. And if you do follow this stuff, here are the good things that happen to the good people. And if you don't, here are the bad things that happen to the people who don't play ball. And I mean, that's a lot of it. This is tribal affinity as well. These are the fake democratic men and women that.
Yes. And I would like to say here that we are at a very delicate juncture, okay? Because the border between the animal kingdom and the divine kingdom is precisely the two kinds of democratic men, the fake one and the true one, okay? And when you were speaking of the peer reviews or the consensus, you have peer review and consensus too in the divine kingdom, with the true democratic man and the aristocratic man. Right. But except that those people are doing the peer review or the consensus animated with truth, goodness, and beauty. Okay, so it's not oligarchical, it's open, and it's a true process of sharing of knowledge and of debate and of dialecticon, dialogos.
Right.
And for the fake one, they would imitate that, they would use the same words, but they are not animated by beauty, goodness, and truth, okay? Level 4, 5, 6 of the upper trigrams or of episteme. So they would have a front, that would deceive many people, if not most people.
Mhm.
But it would be something very close, very for insiders, if I may say so.
Yeah. So, I mean, not to leave people hanging. So, what would you say on so the universal self? Where does that fit in, based on how does the universal self intervene on the very challenging situation that we're describing?
Yes, the universal self, when you were talking of the fact that when you are confused, that there's a voice that will make its presence obvious, okay? You were speaking of the individuality, the second layer. The universal self is absolute silence, okay? It's the deepest experience of meditation, where you feel a abysmal oceanic silence inside, but not as a whole, HOLE, but as a presence.
Mm.
The cosmic presence, the divine presence, is the universal self. That's why I said that, of course, when you reach to the individuality, it's already not bad at all, because it's very difficult to sway someone with an individuality, but you can do it under extreme circumstance. But someone with a universal self, you cannot sway him if he thinks that you're in the wrong. You can only kill him.
Right. And I guess, you know what? I mean, in a sense, that's what we'll call them, the masters of the universe, the oligarchy, whatever we'd like to call them. Right. Because, yeah, I mean, this show is called Escaping the Brave New World. And it was inspired by, you know, I was thinking about Aldous Huxley, his Brave New World, and how it was really a ripoff of Shakespeare, in the sense that Shakespeare's last play, The Tempest,
Yeah,
you know, that's where Brave New World comes from, right? There's
absolutely.
a new world, and evil always has the tendency. I mean, they say this, that evil doesn't really create anything. It just perverts the good. It latches on and tries to sort of make it into its own image.
Yeah,
And that's really what Huxley did with A Brave New World, where he's like, let's imagine like a new island, blank slate. Now imagine this instead, right? And he just kind of works out all, it's away from all the typical proprieties and, you know, expectations of how society is supposed to look like. You're free to imagine this new brave new world. And it's just pure evil, right? But he has a quality of imagination to it, which is what makes it compelling. And the imagery is what allows to sort of sink into the psyche and the imaginations of people, which, as Shelley said in his defense of poetry, you know, he's talking about the importance of poetry and art. It's the ground zero for morality, for truth, for knowledge. It's the imagination. And because that's where any new concept, whether in science or in art, it first takes root in the imagination, and then it can be cultivated and developed, right? Like a scientific idea, before it's formalized into like it's you know, a perfectly closed system, it's just an idea, it's a hypothesis, and it has to be tested out. That happens in the imagination. It's not it doesn't happen as a, you know, deductive process. So evil, it makes sense that evil will go and try to pervert the imagination, which is, I think, if we want to understand a lot of modern pop culture, right, and popular entertainment, I don't think it's too harsh to call it evil, in that it's very much working on the imagination, which seems more subtle, right? Nobody's getting hurt, no harm, no foul, which is what a lot of people like to say today. Not sure that's so true. But if you zoom out, right, and take a more macro view, you see that the art and the culture of a civilization, I mean, you can really see the decline and fall of the civilizations based on the quality and character of ideas that are in the culture. And I mean, I feel like we could go on. It'd be interesting, what's art like in a largely democratic, dominate Plato's category society, right? Or in an oligarchical, or in a timocratic, where there's, I mean, we could go on.
Well, it's very easy. All the dystopian stuff that you can find on Netflix now is typical of the democratic society.
Yeah, and it's very sensual, right? It's because it's based on opinion. Yeah, it's useful, right? You've laid out all these definitions. It's very much anchored in the animal kingdom. So it's very much anchored on pleasure and pain. There's a great quote from the movie Hellraiser: pleasure and pain indistinguishable. Kind of cool, but depends how you read it. But that's very much the modern culture: pleasure and pain indistinguishable. And so art also has a serious place to play, role to play in how it's going to shape the imagination so that we strive, our imaginations are striving towards the upper trigram, right, towards the divine kingdom. All that to say, the evil are the people who will always try to pervert that in some way. And these are members of the oligarchical class or their brain trusts, right? They're Aldous Huxleys and their H.G. Wells, who are a bit more creative, so they can use their talents, but they choose to use it for evil, which is why I think intelligence and IQ scores, sure, okay, you have smart people. What if they choose to do evil? It's not very useful, right?
Yes, because yes, and I would like to add that when I was speaking of the personality, we can also another concept to enrich the hexagram or the two trigrams. Line 1 can be called vitality, okay? Because that's the senses perception, it's the pleasure of the sense and so on. So in a more neutral mode, rather than to call it hedonism, which entails a certain judgment, we can call it vitality. And on the second level, the plutocratic man, as I said in the beginning, he's a bit better or more advanced epistemologically than the democratic man, because he has a certain self-mastery. That second level can be called intellect. And the fake democratic man, which is a third line, can be called psyche, okay? A psyche is the old word meaning a not developed soul. And it's precisely from psyche that you have the word psychology, okay? Because psychology, according to true philosophy, is how you will bring your underdeveloped soul or your not completely open soul to be completely open, okay? Or completely developed. So why I'm going in that? It's because it's related to what you said 2 minutes ago, that you can be very brilliant intellectually, but it doesn't mean that you are in the divine kingdom, okay? Because the function of the intellect is at the second level of the animal kingdom.
Interesting. Well, that makes sense, and that explains a lot. In terms of when you see there are certain people who have talent, I think Aldous Huxley is a perfect example, or H.G. Wells, right? Like they're literary men, they're sort of aristocratic, they like ideas, they have very strong conceptual abilities, but they marshal it for something very, very dark, right? It's not for goodness, truth, and beauty. It's something else. Exact.
And the master are even more dangerous, as you rightly said maybe an hour ago, the fake democratic man, okay? Because the fake democratic man, they are at the level of the psyche, okay? So the psyche is an incomplete soul, but those men have spiritual moments, okay? They have access to that dimension we call the soul.
Right.
But in an inchoate manner. So they're not true democratic man. They're not yet in the divine kingdom, but they have glimpses of that. They have inchoate development. So because of those glimpses, they appear impressive for the plutocratic man and the democratic man. And their prestige is really from those glimpses of spiritual experiences.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and it opens up. I mean, we could go on, but just quickly, I was thinking about yeah. So let's say, for example, I'd say the timocratic or fake timocratic. Let's see where you place it. I had a good discussion in a previous podcast with my poet friend Daniel Leach, and he was talking about, for example, Rome, which in many ways was an imitation of ancient Greece. We could potentially say that.
Yes.
And the art was largely imitation. There was little that was actually original, but it was also a lot of the sculpture, right, is more static than its Greek counterpoint. It's much more lifeless, very close, resembles very closely the originals, but somehow a bit more lifeless. But there's also the opulence, right? Like I have the image of like the Roman emperors, and they have their music, they have their lavish feasts, they have the gilded walls and cornices and everything, but it's sensual, it's very superficial. There's a form, right? There's a formal quality to it. You can't say there's not an artistry to it, but it lacks a conceptual depth, right? It lacks a sense of deeper meaning. And this always leads to decay. Raz.
Exactly, because they're not the inner source of beauty, goodness, and truth, okay? Because for them to truly be a shining society, they need to be in contact with the source. So they can imitate, as you said, a more advanced, epistemologically speaking, society or culture or civilization. But if themselves, they did not have a contact with the origin, with the source, it would be quite obvious for someone having a contact with that source.
Yeah, which I guess is the best defense, right? Because I can always hear, or I hear the counterpoint voices, okay, well, how do you know what the real thing is? Or, who are you to say, what the real thing is, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, if you really are in the habit of engaging in this dialectical process with yourself and challenging your own ideas, then, and in touch with that source, then you can see when people are imitating that. Like they seem to say things the right way and they use the right words, but it's not quite the same. In the same way that a lot of like the Roman imitations of the Greek sculptures, which you could say, hey, they're following the rules, they're doing the same thing, and yet why doesn't it look exactly the same? There's a soul lacking in the work, which is not something you can really imitate if you don't yourself have it. And
yes,
that poses all sorts of deep questions. But to jump, I guess, like what about the upper layer, right? Like I'm thinking, what is the art of the the aristocratic philosophical level of playful exploration? I mean, I think the Renaissance, right? The Italian Golden Renaissance. I think the wonderful, the landscapes, right? The classical Chinese landscapes. It doesn't really get better than that in terms of the sublimity and the quality of soul that emerges from the matter, right? The material and the immaterial are not at war. They're perfectly in harmony and they unfold a great amount of depth. Whereas in the lower, you could say maybe the timocrat or fake timocratic, and below, there's the Apollonian and the Dionysian that's always warring, right? You have the strict formalism, which today we could to tie it back to modern times, you have the conservatives, right, who just kind of want to go, the typical conservatives. I don't want to whitewash everybody here, but it's like, let's just go back to this better time and everybody just has to follow the rules and, then things will work out. And then the other side is the Dionysian, which is like, screw the rules. The rules are a bit strict, right, in that they don't necessarily make you feel like a full human being, but they go the opposite, right? They go to the sort of the romantic heresy of like, I'll go with what I feel and just, let the unbridled feelings sort of guide you. But it's not really the inner voice or the deeper soul or the source. It's really the surface level impulse and sensations, which are very fleeting.
Well, that's a Kool-Aid that the plutocrats impose upon those people.
Yeah, there's a lot of affectation. And I guess,
yes.
And you have the timeless, because you like to use this formula. There's a timelessness when true beauty, goodness, and virtue meet. There's a timelessness, right? Like it doesn't matter if times change, the material and the immaterial quality of, let's say, a Song dynasty landscape or a Renaissance sculpture, or the Divine Comedy or Homer's Iliads or the Three Kingdoms, right? It's not going away, no matter, because there's this perfect marriage of time and timelessness. And that's what the lower kingdom cannot, you can't get that if you're just stuck in the lower kingdom. And so you see extremes.
Yeah, but that brings us to the famous kairos, okay, K-A-I-R-O-S for the people who don't know that word. So as you just said, Dave, kairos is precisely that precious moment when timeless and time meet, or when eternity and time meets, or when the animal meets the divine, okay? For real. And that's, when you were speaking of the aristocratic man or level and the philosophical man, I did not interrupt you because it was appropriate, okay? However, I beg to differ that it's not there the problem. The problem is the transition from the fake democratic man to the true one. Okay, because once someone is in the divine kingdom, we don't need to worry for that person. Okay, he's in good hands, in his inner psychology and in his entourage. Okay, because if you're a true democratic man, you will stop spontaneously to see the people from the animal kingdom, or you will meet them, but they will not be capable to influence you. You wouldn't be influencing them to a certain extent.
Right.
So the true vital nexus that we will have to work upon for a civilizational change is the question how to uplift the fake democratic man to be a true one, especially that the fake democratic man often he will be successful in life, okay? So if he's often, not always, of course, but often, and if he's successful in life, why should he listen to you?
Right. And well, in the Plato's Republic, he actually talks about the how the democratic man becomes a oligarch, actually, right? He does talk about the transitions, which is interesting, but he talks about like the children, right? So in a sense, technically what you're saying is right, where, okay, the democratic man is not, is kind of impervious to sort of being sucked down per se, if he's really truly a democratic man. But then there's always the offspring. And depending on what happens in the society, this is just the reality, right? You can have a sagely person. It doesn't mean their sons or daughters are going to be sages. And that makes sense because it is free will and there is an individual journey. You can't fake it, and it's not going to be handed down to you hereditarily. It can be handed down as a tradition and an image that you aspire to, that you have some close, intimate relationship with, thereby making it a lot easier for your identity to assimilate that. Whereas, you know, if you're not a Timocrat, you don't come from a, you know, illustrious family or something, it can be much more foreign, which gets us back to the changing images of man. Therefore, you're going to have to make a leap in your identity if you're actually going to, you know, gravitate from one level to the other. But I would say, and I asked the question genuinely sort of earlier, like, what do we do? How do we resolve, untangle this knot when there are these different, these various profiles and character types warring? And I think art is really, and culture is really like the middle ground for potentially, we're thought experiment here, dealing with the fake Timocrat boundary condition. And this is what Schiller talks about, that, you know, and Shelley too, that it's through the imagination. And Schiller talks about through play, right? You have to be playful with the imagination and provoke and prompt that light turning on, and present compelling images and metaphors that will naturally awaken what's already there, right? Because even if the person is on a degenerate path, right? I mean, there are a million stories of, you know, addicts, alcoholics, whatnot, you know, that go from one life to another. So we can't say that it doesn't happen. It happens all the time. But one of the key roles of art, at least in a healthy society, is that it's a way to cultivate the imagination and to plant seeds that can blossom and bear fruit.
Absolutely. No, I think that you have the core answer by imagination and to plant seeds, okay? Because I would like to come back to the children of the Timocratic man. If I remember, Plato said that if the children of a Timocratic man, a man motivated by honor, justice, see their father mistreated by the city, by degrading him or by killing him because of XYZ, his son might think that there's no usefulness to be guided by honor and justice. It's better to have a lot of wealth in order to protect my family. Okay, so
yeah,
his son will become a plutocrat, a plutocratic man, motivated by wealth and power, because he saw his father degraded by the city, even if his father was motivated by justice and honor. Okay, so the son concluded that there's no usefulness in justice and honor.
Yeah, they associate that which has worth with those things which can you know, bear riches rather than actual fruit, right?
Exactly.
Wisdom. And
but if the father had the leisure, the time, the energy, and the desire to put some seed in his son or daughter, as you said, for beauty, goodness, and truth, maybe the woes of the family would not push the son and the daughter to conclude that physical wealth and power are better tools to protect the family than honor and justice.
right.
Okay, so once again, we go back to planting the seeds for education, educare, to bring forth beauty, goodness, and truth, and imagination, because and once again, I would say something that might appear not to have a link with, but there's a link. We were discussing of the Roman Empire, okay, and with the transition from the fake democratic man to the true one, and you were speaking of art and imagination. The Romans were excellent architects, okay, they were perfectly capable to make aqueducts, Colosseum, amphitheaters, and so on. But those stuff in the order of mathematics, okay, and not necessarily of higher beauty as the dynamic statues of the Greek.
Absolutely. That's a very fine, beautiful, and subtle distinction. And we've rectified a lot of names here. I like the way we've put names on different things, that some of them are more subtle, especially in the very binary debates that we have here between, like, in the West at least, conservative art versus liberal art. I mean, there's nothing worse than this kind of banality. When the real issue is timelessness, and how is that timelessness expressed in any age, you know,
in time, the famous kairos once again.
Yeah, how is that expressed in time, which necessarily means that it will have its own character specific to the age in which it is born, because the eternal is expressing itself in time. So it will take on certain elements or character of that time, but it will not be hostage to opinion, right? It will not be hostage to a purely ephemeral assessment of reality. It will actually speak to truth, right? To beauty.
Yes, and I would like to give a very practical example. The golden number is always 1.61. Okay, so it's a pure abstract principle of the divine kingdom,
right?
But it's reflected by a specific number in time, 1.61.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and what you do with that 1.61 is unbounded, and yet is infinite, and yet it can always be bounded. You know, whether it's going to be a Renaissance, you know, basilica or chapel, that's, you know, perfect resonance for the singing voice and resonating with the singing voice, where the microcosm and the macrocosm there, you see it meet, right? And in a very spectacular way. Yeah, there's infinite variation and possibility, which is, I guess, that's the real takeaway, that timeless journey, right? When the soul actually takes on a timeless journey, that's actually real freedom, because you're free from the temporal conditions per se, or the changing conditions, or you can resolve your higher identity and place in the universe, and basically truth, with the moment in which you're in, right? Those two can be resolved. They don't have to be at war. And then you're free to create, right?
Exactly.
Then you're free to generate an authentic vision for society, right? The statesmen are able to actually think about, where is their society going in the next 100 years, right?
Absolutely.
In the next 1,000 years, versus what we have today in the West, right? This free trade type dogma stuff. And well, now it's a lot worse. Well, but the free trade made it possible, where it's just sort of individual freedom, very much a democratic society, right? Opinion, whatever is in fashion, you know, what people like, what they desire, that's what's going to be consumed. The economy is going to be based on that. And it's a free market, you know, everybody just has at it. But the result is that there is no vision. And as the proverb says, where there is no vision, the people perish.
Yes. Well, I would like to introduce a very classical opposition between two words, which is freedom and license. Okay. What is offered nowadays by the oligarchical vision, or offer, if you want, is not freedom, it's license. Meaning it's fake freedom, because the person having the impression to be free is not in contact with his individuality and his universal self, which are the layers that would grant him the energy to be truly free, because that person would have the tools of power to be responsible. And when you have the tools of power to be responsible, you are truly free. And Because once again, I want to come back to the three technical level of the animal kingdom: vitality, intellect, and psyche. At those three levels, you can be manipulated, controlled, have things imposed upon you by people more powerful than you. Okay?
Yeah.
But when you get to beauty, goodness, and truth, the true democratic, aristocratic, and philosophical man, uh, you are in contact with the sources of true freedom, because you will get the tools of powers. I repeat myself, but that is the, according to me, and I don't forget the theme of our discussion tonight: how to exit the cave.
Yeah.
If you want to exit the cave, you need to reach to the tools of powers that, when you make you capable to be responsible, then you will be truly free and not in a state of license, which is a fake freedom.
Right. And I mean, the four ever insightful, when I was reviewing Plato's discussion, right, democracy, the thing that stood out is he said, yeah, they're going to say it's the most free society. They're going to say it's the most diverse society. Literally, that's what he's saying.
Oh la la.
It's just going to be, yeah, it's the best. Like, there's everything, people, you know, there's all sorts of different things going on. You know, it's one great, bizarre, free marketplace of ideas. Sure.
Yeah.
But, you know, where is the standard for goodness, truth, and beauty? That's where you see the fangs come out. Because when you start to talk about that, you're a fascist, right? You're a dictator. And so, but ultimately, that is the ultimate dictatorship, right? This is the Brave New World, where
exactly,
you get people to enslave themselves. In a Brave New World, you're free to create your own concentration camp with no tears. That's what Huxley says in his famous lecture, The Ultimate Revolution, which is that people will be enslaved by their passions, by their vices, by their pleasures. And the most perfect system of control is not one in which, you know, you have this one central tyrant sort of, though that can happen, you know, boots on the ground and sort of whipping everybody into shape. It's really where there's the tyranny of the self, right? Of everybody sort of just trying to gratify their own animal kingdom desires with no idea whatsoever of, you know, any greater bearing of, you know, what their life actually means, what, you know, is the relationship of these emotions and passions to everything else in the universe. And so people become enslaved, and that becomes the ultimate dictatorship. That becomes the ultimate concentration camp, because it's chosen. People are freely choosing it, and so it's a lot less difficult to enforce, because, and you're going to encourage it. What the oligarchy is going to do is encourage as much. That's why I love the discussions of psychedelics. You know, like you're able to create your own reality. You know, turn on, tune in, drop out, video games.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a whole like civilization of young men that just play video games and whatnot, and they live in that. But it's
absolutely
all, this is the concentration camp. That's the real dictatorship. So if people actually want to, I guess that's where we get a sense, an intimation of truth and the higher divine kingdom, in that we know what it's, we can start by what it's not. We know it's not a dictatorship of the senses and the passions and the vices, and that nobody's ever free or happy if they just do that. And in an imperial system, in an oligarchical system full of democratic men, it's all encouraged, so that people essentially function with the vision of the flesh, but never with the vision of the intellect, never with anything beyond what they can immediately touch, taste, hear, see, or smell.
Exactly. And I would like once again to remind that the intellect is not so high. It's only the second level
Right.
corresponding to the plutocratic man. Okay. The easy way to remember the lower trigram is the acronym VIP. Okay. V for vitality, I for intellect, and P for the psyche. The psyche being the inchoate soul.
And remind people
Uh,
at the top above that is
Above that is beauty, goodness, and truth.
okay.
The upper trigram. So and it's amusing why I created the acronym VIP, because that's absolutely the fantasy of the ego, okay? Because all ego is a VIP, okay? A very important person. So in the animal kingdom, that VIP and I like it because it's not judgmental, okay? Because let's be frank, when we are speaking of democratic man, plutocratic, and fake democratic, we are giving judgments. And I'm not shy of it, but there is a judgment. But when we speak of vitality, intellect, and psyche, it's only a description of that level.
Right.
Okay? And there's nothing wrong with vitality, nothing wrong with intellect, and nothing wrong with psyche. But what is wrong is to stay there and not to keep on the epistemological journey to beauty, goodness, and truth, precisely. Because when you are in the divine kingdom, the animal doesn't disappear because our body is still here. Okay, the animal is still there, but the animal wouldn't be guided by beauty, goodness, and truth, and not by external voices imposed upon the animal.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to say it, to speak on your idea of, casting judgment, I mean, we started with Confucius's rectification of names.
Yeah.
And being able to call things by their name is perfectly fine. And especially whether it's in a clinical setting, a medical setting, or a philosophical problem or disease, right, that needs to be treated, you can't really solve the problem if you can't put a name on it.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to mention an author, because before I forget,
Okay.
there's an author named E. Michael Jones, E for Eugene Michael Jones, who wrote, I think in 2000, a brilliant book. The title is Sexual Liberation and Political Control.
Okay.
Okay. And it's a brilliant social, philosophical, psychological analysis precisely on the oligarchical manipulation upon the people, pushing them to license rather than helping them in their natural epistemological journey towards beauty, goodness, and truth.
Right.
That would bring them to true freedom and license. But of course, the oligarchs are not interested by that, because if people have the powers, the tools of powers to be truly free, well, the oligarch would have less slaves, of course.
Absolutely. And I mean, the catch is, because some people might sort of throw out a label that there's some sort of like authoritarian bend here, but it's that really, from the standpoint of the individual, only the individual can discover themselves, right? Like we talked about, we mentioned, there's people who, as Tim Dillon said, you can look at them and you can see that they don't know who they are. I mean, nobody else can tell them who they are. They have to discover that on their own. And that's something that they can only do of their own free will. So in that sense, people are free. They're totally free to make that journey. And I guess in that sense, we can say the things that are bad, that are evil and ugly, to invert the categories here, are the things that prevent you from freely making that journey of the soul. And, as Thales said, know thyself. And in that way, getting some intimation of the greater universal self, right, which we can never know perfectly, but only less imperfectly, which will always come by virtue of our ability to investigate ourselves and to have that dialectic with ourselves. The things that stop us from doing that, whether it's just responding to immediate impulse, being prompted by, you know, things that pervert the imagination and sort of inspire destructive behaviors or ideas. I mean, those are the bad things. Those are the opposite of the goodness, truth, and beauty are not those things, right? I mean, that's the first approximation, right? If we can get there as a society, right, we can admit that, you know, there's such thing as ugliness, there's such thing as injustice, and there's such thing as bad, then necessarily there must be good, there must be beauty, and there must be truth.
Yes.
It's a long journey. I mean, that's the history of civilization. Is this?
Yes. And I would say that I'm not shy to suggest very practical solutions, okay? I would like to say to everyone, listen to more classical music.
Mm.
Even if you have never been introduced to classical music by your family, your friends, listen to something classical. Listen to some Mozart, listen to some Bach, listen to some Beethoven, Chopin, some operas maybe. I feel that music is something more accessible to everyone, okay? Because I would like to say, read Plato, okay? But maybe reading Plato is more difficult, or read Schiller. But if you don't want to read Plato or to read Schiller, listen to some classical music.
And Confucius and both Plato, I mean, really emphasize the importance and function of music.
Absolutely.
And I wasn't even going to go here, but I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this difference between classical music and pop music. Long story short, pop music is basically, it's an imitation, right? If you look at classical music, you have a refrain, you have a chorus. In poetry, classical poetry, you have rhyming, right? You have all these things. In pop music, fast forward, they're applying the formulas, right? You always have that rhyme, you always have that refrain that always comes back, and it's just run in loops, and it's just a pure formula, and it's the affectation.
Yes.
It's just sparking. It's putting you in a trance. That's the basic idea of trance. Is you're put in an altered state, whether it's just right? That's just the simple version, or, you know, Katy Perry, right? You're hot when you're cold, yes when you're no, whatever. It's really the same stuff. Whereas in classical music, and there's no development. So that's the baseline. In pop music, it's the affectation, it's the loops of keeping you in that trance state for a moment, and then it's gone, and then you go back to normal life. It's over until you decide to escape once more. So it really sort of creates a divide in every person. On the other hand, classical music involves development, and you could say both spiritual and technical, right? There's the wedding of both. There's rhyme. There's an opening theme, right? A Bach theme is like 2, 3, 4 notes, but then how that theme is developed imaginatively, right, and with great rigor, to make that development as rich and thorough and in-depth as possible. That's where the real beauty, the depth or the truth, and the elevating sublime quality emerges, as your mind is challenged to see how that initial idea, that seed, that musical seed, fully comes to fruition, and that you're there with the composer in spirit to follow the fruition of that idea from, you know, a little seed into a beautiful flower or garden or symphony.
Yeah, because if the seed of your soul wants to go beyond the psyche, be inspired by a music that is complete rather than an incomplete music.
Yes. And I mean, Brahms's Fourth Symphony is what's led us into this discussion. For anybody who'll be listening, that's our intro. I would recommend listen to some Brahms. Listen to Brahms's Fourth Symphony performed by Fongler.
Yes.
44, ideally version. But I think that's actually some great advice. And I think that's actually a great place to end our conversation.
Absolutely. Listen to classical music would be our last advice for tonight.
Absolutely, it's great advice. So I really want to thank you, Kwan, for joining us. Thank you for the fine discussion. And thank you, everybody, for listening. So we'll be back with a new episode shortly. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.